Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
So today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Briana Grosicki with us from PlaceEconomics. Thank you for joining me, Briana.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit about your background.
So I grew up in Virginia and surrounded by Civil War history, which is, I think, what kind of got me into preservation is just, you know, running on a Civil War battlefield for a cross-country race in high school. Just really allowed me to explore historic sites around me and, you know, be impacted by the events that took place there. Also, for like day job, I am associate principal at PlaceEconomics currently, and I've been with the firm 7 years. And I'm also chairwoman of Preservation Action, which is America's grassroots lobby for historic preservation. And I'm also on the National Alliance of Preservation Commission's board of directors, and have been with them for almost 6 years now.
I really, and I think I just discovered it last year. I really enjoyed their newsletter. I read it online.
Oh, good. The Alliance Review.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yes. No, it's a great publication and great resource. And I also love the listserv on the email listserv if you're a part of that.
I'm not.
You should sign up to join that, because it's everybody from, you know, how do you hide, you know, utility boxes in your historic district to, you know, how to handle this situation or that situation. It's very great.
Oh yes, yeah, and those are all problems that are like very, very immediate in historic districts. I consult with our local preservation group, and the past couple weeks they've been putting meters in all through town, so I've been getting all kinds of calls.
Absolutely.
that is a big problem. So okay, well, how did you get to working with our at PlaceEconomics? Was it did you go to school for preservation, or what is your background in that way?
Yeah. So my long-winded answer is that I've always kind of been a local government nerd.
Okay.
Like I got involved with my Main Street. I volunteered with my Main Street district when I was 16 on the events committee. And then I decided I had an internship with my town of Woodstock, Virginia. Okay. I was literally our tall grass inspector one summer with a ruler, driving around town. But I left for college. I went to William & Mary for undergrad, thinking that I wanted to be a planner in a historic town.
Right.
And then at the end of undergrad, I was like, I'm not done learning. I want to learn more about preservation. And so I went straight into grad school at University of Pennsylvania in Philly.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is great to learn about the layers of history and how we're inside in what used to be an 1830s row house in Chinatown that, you know, had Chinese architecture stuck on the front in the 70s. And
right.
How do you tell the story of all these layers of history? Yeah. So at Penn, I took Donovan Rypkema's class, Economics Preservation, had a good time. And actually, Donovan was headed to the World Urban Forum, which is this giant conference about city building put on by UN Habitat. And he was going to Naples, Italy, and he was like, hey, do you want to come with me and help, you know, woman the booth at this big conference? And so We had a great time. And I think I, solidified myself as a good person to him then.
Right.
The summer after I graduated, he called and said, "Hey, I've got some project with, North Carolina Main Street. I don't know how long it'll last, but, will you come on board for that?" And I was getting ready to move to Muncie, Indiana with my then fiance, now husband, and had no job lined up. So I was like, sure. And that was about 7 years ago.
Okay.
I'm now part owner, associate principal, and PlaceEconomics is now 5 people. So I live in Savannah, Georgia. Donovan's in DC. Caitlin Cotton is in DC. Rodney Swink is in Raleigh, North Carolina. And our newest addition, Alyssa Freistock, is in Chicago. So,
well, so you were already working remotely before.
Yes, exactly. We've been remote. I would say the biggest change with COVID is that we can't, go do site work.
Oh yeah.
Which is very disappointing for Donovan. He loves to, get on the ground and talk with people and, see the main streets or see the historic districts. Yes. But I think for me, it's been nice to kind of shift a little bit remote because it allows me, I have a 1-year-old. So like I can, through Zoom, we can still host focus groups and client calls and I still get to be included.
Right.
And I still get to be, momming full time.
Right.
So that's
and that's nice to have that balance, especially for the little one.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you feel, I know my next question is like, why preservation? Do you feel like you've explained that, or do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was actually homeschooled growing up.
Okay.
And pretty much every Friday we took a field trip, and being in Virginia, we often went to historic sites, and that just really spoke to me. I really loved being around them. And so then when I figured out like, hey, you can do municipal preservation, like that is just the coolest thing. I get to be a local government nerd. And so now being on the consultant side of things, you still get to, learn about all these different communities and try to help them with their problems, but then also not take on all their problems because I'm still coming back home. So.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that would be, because you get to impact, and you get to probably impact more than you would if you were just in one community too.
A bit. Yeah.
So I know we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but tell me about PlaceEconomics. What kind of services you offer? Is it nationwide, worldwide?
Yeah. So we work very specifically at the intersection of economics and historic preservation. Donovan Rypkema started the firm over 30 years ago and worked for himself for many years and has had people on as needed. But since I've come on, we've really been able to expand the firm to now the 5 people and, find work that keeps us busy. Most of our work is domestic, but we have done assignments abroad. We actually just finished up a second assignment for the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, looking at their modern heritage and how they might structure policy to help preserve and conserve more of that. But yeah, it's been really fun to work all over the country and see, tens of communities. One time we had to visit 17 towns in Illinois, and you get to see a lot of Illinois.
Yes.
Towns, and that is great experience to see how many passionate people there are out there fighting for their, school or courthouse or whatever the building is. It's really impactful.
Yeah. When I was on the website doing the research to prepare for this, I was looking, you have like a lot of a focus on remote sites. Is that COVID related, or remote services? Is that COVID related?
Yeah, that's our attempt to still, we had to sit down and say, okay, well, we can't, go on the ground in, town X, but we can still provide a good product despite that not being on the ground. So we've shifted things and actually have several projects going where we're entirely remote and just doing focus groups online and looking at a lot of pictures, a lot of Google Street View to absorb the towns. And I speak to a lot of different organizations and companies, doing the podcast, and it's amazing to me how quickly people, quickly adapt it. And then they also, the creativity, I think it's great just from a business standpoint of being able to,
to reach different people that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise because of because they're now, at home too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about the economic benefits of preservation.
So the way we approach it most often is looking at historic district boundaries,
Okay.
and kind of what's happening in those areas of a city versus everything else. We do assignments at a lot of different geographies. Sometimes it's involved with looking at the impact of tax credit projects or Main Street districts. But we've really had a good streak of people hiring us to do these citywide studies, looking at the citywide economic impact of their local preservation program. So oftentimes what we found with these historic districts versus everything in the city that's not in a historic district is that they're really economically, socially, and culturally dense and productive. One area that people often maybe jump to conclusions about with historic districts is the value premium. Are historic districts more expensive? Do they hurt my property values? Those sorts of thoughts often jump into people's heads. But we find time and time again from places as small as Saratoga Springs, New York to LA is that historic districts, particularly local historic districts, the more oversight / protection seems to provide a larger value premium in the market. And it's provided some stability from foreclosures as we've mapped those through the past session. And I don't want people to think that, historic districts are the most expensive house.
Right.
We map the change in value over time. And so what it means, and even in LA, actually, the average house in a historic district was worth less than others that weren't designated.
Right.
But those houses in the historic districts appreciated in value at a greater rate, which is the American, we own a home because we want to grow our wealth, grow our asset. And that's exactly what historic districts have done all over the country.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know we have a realtor that follows us and, will come to our events and things. And he asked me that question specifically. And I sent him to your website after I did some research, because he's like, I've been reaching out to the Realtors Association, and he said, nobody can give me the answer. So you had the answer.
Absolutely.
So, do you also, when you're looking at the economic benefits of preservation, do you look at the job creation aspects, or is it mostly like property values?
So that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about since joining PlaceEconomics is that Don is a very curious person. Yeah. So we often cast a very wide net of let's measure everything and then have to reel ourselves into certain areas. But yeah, I think I'll just reiterate that just historic district and older areas, even if they're not designated, and our research has proved this, so is the National Trust, formerly Green Labs, showed that historic areas just have more people in them, they have more businesses in them, more jobs per square foot. Even in places like New York City, we saw greater propensity of startup businesses and small businesses to be located in historic districts. Women and minority-owned businesses choose to be in historic districts all the time. And the rehabilitation work itself, we know, is labor-intensive, and that creates economic impacts as well. One stat that we've had recently is that for every 100 jobs created through new construction, it creates 135 jobs elsewhere in the economy. But for every 100 jobs created in rehab, creates 186 jobs elsewhere in the economy. So because rehab is labor intensive and uses more skills and less materials, that has a larger local impact. And I also think the whole circular economy is gaining traction. Long before Joanna Gaines made reclaimed shiplap a thing, people have been reusing building materials. Like, I can't go to Home Depot and find replacement materials for my 1919 house, which is not even, it's not designated, but I can't find this trim work or the parts for the windows. So I'm going to have to rely on Savannah has like one deconstruction firm in town that's actually all lady run. It's called Repurpose Savannah. So, I'll be looking to them to find replacement parts for things.
Right.
And that is all local if you can keep the materials flowing. So I know a bunch of cities are looking at deconstruction ordinances and how to, help with small P preservation. Just maintain your house, invest in existing resources. It all adds to the economy.
Right. It does. It does. And it's also, I think, acknowledging the green aspect, and with the deconstruction ordinance, acknowledging that the materials are not the same, and they're more valuable than something you could just go buy off of in a hardware store now.
Yeah.
Because of the material it's made from and the workmanship and everything else. So are you, I don't know if you deal with this or if you get pushback when you go into communities, but I know gentrification is like a buzzword, and I struggle with it because I'm like, that's how we make our money. But do you feel like preservation makes neighborhoods less affordable, or do you feel like it holds true that they stay about the same as they were starting out?
So I think my issue with the word gentrification, I don't know, I almost think it's like an academic term mostly, because like I find very few people talk about it in a meaningful way. So like, is preservation causing gentrification? I don't know. Is house flipping, is speculative development? It's like there's all these other factors happening. And so the fact that an area was privileged enough to be publicly recognized as a historic district, I just don't make that link. But again, it's like preservation has a communication problem where we're not talking about like what is preservation, and so people make these assumptions. And I think, I heard a guy on an airplane a while back say that he invests in properties in Boston, Savannah, and New Orleans just to turn them into Airbnbs. And that type of speculative development is what, skyrockets a neighborhood and changes the pace of change. And I think historic districts can protect from that, right?
Right.
If it can curb some of that speculative development. And I also think there's areas, particularly like even here in Savannah, where these neighborhoods are economically depressed. They're probably former redlined areas. And so I think people see any change as, oh, that's gentrification. But, and I think that's what you were getting at is, okay, we've rehabbed this property. It's now worth more. Is that a bad thing for the neighborhood? No, but like, how do you spread out the wealth and make sure that the people that want to stay there can stay there? And so the displacement issue that's legit. And so there's definitely, in our recent study in Miami, we suggested that, next time they go to enact a local historic district, that they also provide some affordable housing overlays, making it easier to, convert a house into a duplex, or build an ADU, or convert a garage into an ADU, therefore providing more spaces for people to live on different price points, and hopefully curb displacement.
And the research shows that if you have a mixed income community, it's actually a stronger community than so and I think that's something. I think when people hear affordable housing, they kind of freak out, but it's not necessarily what people think of. It's just having different price points.
Exactly. And that economic inclusiveness, oftentimes, again, people see a historic district and they think these big grand houses, but oftentimes if you look at the spread of historic districts that are in a neighborhood, they have a whole bunch of different types of neighborhood. And actually, even that fancy looking historic district probably has a lot of hidden density, and there are people on all sorts of the income spectrum that can afford to live there, because there's different sizes of units. And I think people forget that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And you were talking about that speculative development and the Airbnbs. I think that's something that the local ordinances should really look at. I know that there's restrictions in Lancaster City because it does. It takes housing stock away then from people who live here, and then it forces all the rest of the prices up. So that is a struggle. It is, and I don't know if that market is changing now, just because they lost the people who were doing that took a big hit this spring. So I don't know what the trends are there. I'm curious to watch those.
Yeah. I will as well. Here in Savannah, I know that because the SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, is online, that a lot of the landlords are feeling pressure because they don't have as much student demand for housing as they used to, and there's not as much Airbnb demand. So will they go back to renting to families for a reasonable price? Right. I hope so, but I don't know.
So, well, what challengers and trends do you see in preservation?
I think preservation's big challenge right now is relevancy, and again, this communication issue. I was watching the Dismantle Historic Preservation Conference that my friend Sarah Marsom hosted a few weeks back. And one of the recent conversations, Bonnie McDonald, who's the executive director of Landmarks Illinois, said that she's always practiced that preservation is about people. And I think we're still bringing a lot of the preservation field to that realization, where we might say that, but your nonprofit's annual report is still plastered with pictures of buildings that have no people in them. So It's like, you have to think about how you're presenting yourself. Like, if you care about people, then your annual report should be all people. Right. And if you save that house, you better talk about the family that
and tell the story,
moved from it, or it just. So we as preservationists have to communicate better about why we need to be at the table, why we care about affordable housing, how we can be involved in affordable housing, how it is more affordable to rehab existing units than to build new. And a lot of people are just struggling to make those connections with their local networks. And even on the national scale, we've seen, putting my preservation action hat on now, we've seen great legislation in Congress this year, like the Moving Forward Act. We got some preservation aspects of the historic tax credit in there. That was the Democrats' House bill for infrastructure. We got the Great American Outdoors Act passed, which funds the backlog of National Park Service maintenance. Like, huge wins on that side. And then on the other side is these regulation changes, changes in the National Register process, changes to NEPA, blatantly ignoring tribal consultations. Like, all this stuff is happening. So we as preservationists need to be better at communicating, hey, I'm a preservation voter. There are thousands of people and thousands of communities across the country that have preservation programs that care about these issues, that want to be able to list their local courthouse. And if you make those National Register changes, that might make it more difficult. So with Preservation Action, like, we try to empower people to feel confident enough to approach their elected officials, and we do that through Advocacy Week, which only happens once a year, but like, you can reach out to your member of Congress today and let them know that you're a preservation voter. And I think it goes also with local and state reps too. Are you making a yearly pitch to Lancaster City Council on, like, what is historic preservation in Lancaster done this year?
Well, and I, when we're talking to homeowners, I always say, these ordinances and this zoning and these decisions about the demolition, any of the things that happen that need the approval happen at the municipal level. And so if you want those to change, you need to work with your municipality to change, that there needs to be a review if there's a demolition, or, any of those things, because it's not impacted even at the county level. It's all local.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think back to, like, preservation is so grassroots. Like, even the little ladies who saved Mount Vernon, like, that was a grassroots effort. getting the National Historic Preservation Act passed was a grassroots effort. The fact that we saved the historic tax credit and the Tax Reform Act of 2017 was a grassroots effort. So, most local historic commissions are staffed by volunteers.
Yes.
So I think people forget all these things, and it's hard because parts of preservation are institutionalized.
Right.
We are part of the system that has to change. We know we have a diversity issue, but the only way we're going to change that is with more energy and more people coming to the table.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And the more people you have and the more voices that you have, it helps to be more inclusive and tell more of the complete story of the people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything that you want to cover that we didn't? I usually ask that just because sometimes things pop into people's heads as we're talking.
Yeah, I mean, at PlaceEconomics, we are diving into a project on intangible heritage. And that's also something that the National Alliance Preservation Commissions has recently issued I don't know if you saw forum that was at the beginning of August here,
Okay.
But they recently issued a statement of how we're going to really help train local historic preservation commissions to be more inclusive. Mm-hmm. And I think recognizing culture that isn't always tangible and like the fanciest building in town,
right,
is a hurdle that a lot of preservationists have to get over. The integrity question.
Right.
Designation might not be the future for everything. It's okay. It's still preservation if you reuse the building and it's not landmarked.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is.
So I look forward to watching how different municipalities and different groups fight for intangible heritage, which, could be tortilla making or a parade route, the Mummers Parade, all those things, and how are they celebrated? How are they transmitted and safeguarded to the next generation? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, buildings are a part of that. Like the study we did for Nashville, absolutely, people go to Nashville to see Honky Tonk. Would Honky Tonk be the same if it wasn't in those brick buildings on Lower Broadway? It's like the intangible happens in the tangible.
Right.
So if you lose the tangible, it's harder to
tell the story.
So in that sense, designation is helpful. Mm-hmm. But it can't be our only tool. So I really look forward to seeing how preservationists tackle that. As we
I think that's an interesting concept. I just finished reading Slavery in the North, and he's not a historian. He is actually a psychologist, and he was writing about collective memory and how if you don't have those touch points, the memories start to fade, and then people mm-hmm. just assume that if people move away, people die, and then nobody's there to remind you that happened. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it was I thought it was a very it really solidified in my mind the concept of places and places being important and having those things to like have those touchstones for telling the story of the history. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the having that intangible heritage now, that's interesting, and I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think from San Francisco is trying to tackle it. San Antonio, Texas is trying to tackle it. I'm sure there's other municipalities that are also looking into it. But yeah, like what is the role of the government in that sort of thing? Right. Will be an interesting question to explore.
Yes. Yeah. So is there anything, I know that we're not really like out in the world doing things, but is there anything that you would like to promote, a seminar, a webinar, anything that you're doing?
Yeah, actually, that great opportunity. Preservation Action Foundation is our 501c3 partner, and they are hosting our annual auction and fundraiser, which will be October 27th. That's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. It's kind of the commencement to the National Trust Virtual Pass Forward Conference at the end of October. So we're going to have a 3-week-long silent auction And then on the 27th at 7 p.m. is our hour-long live auction and also educational opportunity. We're going to have pre-recorded cameos from preservation celebrities and members of Congress, and a special guest speaker who's going to talk about kind of an undertold story in preservation, grassroots story. And there'll be auction items to bid on. So PlaceEconomics is going to donate some of our webinars and services. Maybe an hour chat with Donovan type of thing. And there are going to be lots of other great preservation gifts and professional services, experiences, and tours for people to purchase. And all the proceeds go to the Preservation Action Foundation. Their hallmark program is the Advocacy Scholars Program, which sends students to Advocacy Week to meet with their representatives in Congress every March. So it's a great way to support preservation and train the next generation of preservationists.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for sharing that. I will make sure that when this goes on our website that we have the link to that information too, so
Thank
that
you. I appreciate
somebody
that.
can just go to it right away. So how can our listeners contact you?
Yeah, so my email is bgrosicki@placeeconomics.com. And PlaceEconomics is on Facebook, and our Instagram is @PlaceEconomics. Colleague Caitlin does a good job of keeping that up. But we love to interact with people. Now that we're all virtual, our schedules are pretty free. If anyone needs, a guest speaker for something, we're happy to work with you.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.